Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Reset from Burnout. It's been being provided by the PA Care Partnership in association with OMSAUS, the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. At any time during the presentation, like Nancy said, please type your questions into the Q&A feature. You'll find that by running your mouse near the bottom of your screen. It's in between the participants tab and the polls tab. Please let us know if you would like to ask your questions live in today's town hall. Today's moderators are myself, Jamal Ford, Nancy Massey, and Mark Durgan. Dr. Jackson will be speaking to us from her studio today. And in order to enjoy the best visualization of this presentation, please set your Zoom to speaker view. If you need help, please see the chat for instructions. And now I will introduce our speaker for the day. Dr. Jackson has a bachelor's degree from Drexel University, a master's degree in elementary education from Temple, and a doctoral degree from Wilmington University in leadership and innovation. Dr. Jackson is a woman pursuing her purpose, passion, and life's priority to share her belief that all children deserve the best education available. She is an award-winning author, educator, and entrepreneur who is recognized as a leading educational trainer in trauma-informed practices and cultural competence. She is a veteran educator with over 20 years of experience supporting nonprofit and executive leadership. She also has her own radio show on Voice America every Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. And with that, I will pass it over to Dr. Jackson.
Hello and welcome to Reset from Burnout. I'd like to just start our conversation with this quote. It has resonated with me the first time that I read it from Dr. Brené Brown. This pandemic experience is a massive experiment in collective vulnerability. We can be our worst selves when we're afraid, or our very best, bravest selves. In the context of fear and vulnerability, there is often very little in between because we are uncertain and afraid. Our default is self-protection. We don't have to be scary when we're scared. Let's choose awkward, brave, and kind. Let's choose each other. You know, as I think about the impacts that the past 2 years has had on all of us, we identify this as collective trauma. Collective trauma creates a weight emotionally, physically, mentally, and cognitively. And there is a cost to running a race with a weight for over 2 years straight. If not addressed, collective trauma leads to new social norms born out of the negative effects of ambiguous loss and traumatic fallout from such things as fear, anxiety, hopelessness, and avoidance. This leaves residue on those in our roles of service, of caregiving, of support, of teaching, of healing, especially when, although it is a mistake to do, especially when we connect our value to the results of fixing problems, people, and situations. You know, empathy is the emotion and compassion is the energy or action. And anything that requires energy and action will result in fatigue and stress without any type of recovery time. I know you love what you do, and many of us think that burnout can't happen to us because we love our field. Well, what happens with burnout is that our positive qualities erode and turn into feelings of exhaustion, depletion, cynicism, irritability, ineffectiveness, low ability to cope, and yes, fear of failure. If we become honest and recognize that it's not that we don't love what we do, I want to say that I see you and I know that your passion is real, but you're tired. It's not that you don't care about those that you are caring for, but you're exhausted. And before we actually jump into our content, I first want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. I want to make sure that we're talking about understanding some key terms that are often used interchangeably, but actually they each have different nuances of impact and effect and even cause. Frontline professionals may recognize the cumulative stressors that they face, but they don't always realize that those stressors actually have a name, especially when we are in a field where the workload is heavy, the work experience is huge, and we're working with those who have been impacted by trauma, and we're living through a collective trauma experience together. And these stressors, they actually have a name. You're not crazy. You're not lazy. You're not strong. You have not compromised your strength because you're tired. You still are strong. You still are powerful. But let's begin to understand what actually is going on. All right, so I want to make sure that as we talk about terms that we're actually talking about the same thing. So compassion fatigue is the natural, predictable, treatable, and preventable unwanted consequences of working with people who are suffering. And the powerful thing to understand about compassion fatigue is that the natural and predictable and treatable essence of it, but that it is also preventable if we recognize that what we are doing collectively is actually connected to the weight of the work that we're doing. So we should expect, if we're giving that energy, that fatigue is going to follow. And so let us begin to prepare on the front end of how to head off the fatigue. But when it shows up, begin to do things consistently that will allow us to treat it. The second is secondary traumatic stress. It's the natural behavior and emotions that result from the knowledge about trauma, about being traumatized, as well as experiencing traumatic events. When we are bearing witness to the experiences that are traumatic to others, the stress that results from helping others who are experiencing or going through suffering, it creates what's called a secondary traumatic stress on our system. So recognizing that that stress is tied to our bearing witness or experiencing or supporting those who are stressed. Stress and trauma are contagious. And so the residue of that, understanding that that's a secondary traumatic stress that can show up in our systems. Vicarious trauma is a cumulative transformative effect of a professional who is working with those who have been impacted by trauma. But the key thing about vicarious trauma is that it begins to transform us. The symptoms actually can begin to look a lot like PTSD, and it begins to change how we show up as individuals, our character, our response, our outlook. But when we talk about burnout, burnout is a collection of symptoms associated with a compromise of our workload within an organization. It includes emotional exhaustion, increased cynicism, and decreased self-efficacy. And it's tied to our workload, our stress, our strain, the erosion of our idealistic view of the work that we're doing or our ability to create impact. And that when it is unrecognized and unsupported by an organization, it begins to continue to create or have the person feel that lack of motivation, that again, level of exhaustion that continues to build over time. And the symptoms themselves become a form of fatigue, a disconnect, a lack of belief in what we're doing. But I shared that that's tied to how our organizations begin to look at how we systemically address our compassion satisfaction. When we look at this pyramid of the compassion satisfaction from WellPoint Care Network, I want you to take a close look at the two cornerstones to this image. This image starts with the cornerstones of self-awareness and a positive program climate or culture. Those are the cornerstones to the work or foundation of cultivating compassion satisfaction. But look again at those purple triangles in between those cornerstones. What those purple triangles help us understand, again, in the work that we're doing, we should begin to recognize that systemic stress, our own primary stress, and the potential of that transformative experience of vicarious trauma, it's a part of the journey. It can show up. If we're not careful to pay attention to creating preventative measures, being proactive about creating a systemic approach to wellness, and recognizing that we can create responses within ourselves that support us, but we can't be surprised that those elements show up. Understanding that when we are willing to dive into our own self-awareness and intentionally work to build a culture around positive, intentional wellness programs, we're looking at 3 specific strategies, and those are those lime green triangles towards the top. Relationship, regulation, and getting clear and remembering our reason to be. Those lead to compassion satisfaction. When we understand that self-care is more than beauty treatments, exercise programs, or anything external, it starts within us. Know what you need in order to navigate life. A pedicure, that doesn't last, but investing in your self-awareness and your growth on an everyday, consistent basis, that is where self-care begins. But if we're going to say that I'm going to lead myself out of this place of burnout, I have to be willing on this first journey, this first leg of self-awareness, I have to be willing to ask myself what needs to change in me and for me. Let me share a couple of key things to consider when you want to reduce the impact of collective trauma. Acknowledge the impact of the event, how it has affected you, and reinforce your resilience by expressing and processing those feelings. Don't hold them in. Begin to find an opportunity to process it. Remember, it's not just the event that you went through, but it is how you have processed what you're going through. Take care of your body. Trauma is trapped in our nervous system. What routines and rituals are allowing you to pay attention to the sensory responses your body is sending you through symptoms? Find community for self and creative expression using multiple aspects of your brain to move beyond ruminating around what's not working. Find a trauma-informed therapist. And I want to underscore this. I appreciate that you are in this session, but recognize when it is necessary for you to receive professional support and help. And then lastly, take a role in community rebuilding. It's an opportunity for us to tap into our power, understanding that what we are going through is not hopeless and we are not helpless. So find a community to connect with and rebuild, not try to go back to something. Build where you are. But if we're going to use both sides of that pyramid, it can't stop with self-care. Shouting self-care at people who actually need community care is how we fail people. And if I'm allowed to define from the very same author of what community care is, unlike self-care, community care does not place the onus of compassion on a single individual. People are committed to leveraging their power to be there for one another in various ways. If we recognize that you are not in this alone, we are in collective trauma. So let us use collective approaches that are tied to a system-building approach for us to navigate, be resilient, not bouncing back, but bouncing forward. In order to have the keys to healing community, it first starts with us using our voice. Healing is in response to the needs and voice of the group or community. Improving our personal well-being, not just by identifying a self-care day where you receive a gift card and you go out and do something for yourself, but improving personal well-being as a system-level approach. Self-care, it is important. We must be accountable for our own practice, and it is equally important to attend to structural, cultural, and organizational issues that pathologize staff, putting the issue on the staff or the people. As leaders within organizations, we must recognize what are we doing within our structure, our culture, or our organization that may be re-traumatizing or perpetuating the staff or the stress within the staff. Instead of pathologizing the issue onto the staff, recognizing that if we look at the system, we have an opportunity to do things that are innovative. Healing harnesses the human agency and power within the group or the community that already exists. And when we harness that collective power, it offers room for innovation, for possibilities. You see, when we go back to that pyramid, those cornerstones are self-awareness and the culture and the climate of the organization around well-being. We then become strategic about being innovative around these three things: relationship, regulation, and our reason to be. If we start with relationship, most people can trace their successes and failures to relationships in their lives. When John Maxwell said that, it struck me, and I had to pause and actually think about that. Most people can trace their successes and failures to the relationships in their lives. So when we understand the equation of relationships and how we must be willing to be focused on the quality of the relationships that we have, as well as how we are relational with others. The relationships that we have in and around us can add to us, they can subtract from us, they can create division, or they can multiply. They can help us not only add to who we are, but begin to create legacy, begin to create impact that moves beyond us. But if we're honest, the very first relationship that we have to pay most attention to is the one with ourselves. So if we're going to do the work to understand how our own ability to show up in spaces as either adding to individuals, taking away, creating division, or are we focused on multiplying and creating boundaries for those who are around us? Assess the quality of our relationships. How are you adding, or how are they adding, taking away from, or are they actually cultivating multiplication? You see, when I talk about doing the work for you, on you, it's an opportunity for you to focus on who goals, not just do goals. So many times we focus on setting those do goals. I'm going to do these things differently. I'm going to challenge you on creating who goals. Because when I coach individuals, oftentimes they'll say, well, I'm this way until someone does such and such. I'm going to push back on you. Who are you regardless of what someone else is doing? You give someone permission to push you out of character. Don't give them permission. Get rock solid on who you are going to be in 2022. I set I am goals. So I am, instead of creating a list of a bunch of to-dos and tasks, I set I am goals. I'm going to give you an example of two of my I am goals, and then I'm going to challenge you to begin to set who goals on who you are going to be in 2022. And the statement starts with I am, and you finish the statement for yourself. Two of mine are I am a leader who will be a voice that reflects my values and integrity in every room I am in, regardless of how uncomfortable it may feel. My second is I am a woman who will challenge others to fiercely pursue their passion as I live mine out loud. Who are you? I am a Peloton fan, and I was running one morning, and the instructor said in my ear, "You're not tired, you're uninspired. Don't work 8 to 10 hours a day for someone else and not devote time working on you." I'm asking you, who are you? Write it down. And then, as we unpack who you are, we then can tap into regulation. And oftentimes, people will talk about time management, and I'm going to challenge you around energy management. You see, time is finite. We only have a certain amount of time every single day. We've got 24 hours to work with and nothing more. But time is finite. Energy is renewable. We can increase and decrease our energy levels by paying attention to 4 buckets of energy that we have in our tank. How are you renewing your energy in your physical, your emotional energy, your mental energy, and your spiritual energy? When we are willing to recognize that, we can pay closer attention to our energy tanks, we're then able to unpack a couple of key things. In those 4 tanks, the first is do an energy audit. For the next 2 weeks, I want you to do an energy audit. List the tasks that you do and write 3 numbers next to them. Right after you've done them, take a look and think about, write a -2 next to the things that drain your soul. Next to the things that were moderate, they were okay, you're going to write a 1. Next to the things that feed your soul, you're going to write a +2. And then take inventory of how often are you actually accessing the things that are a +2 for you, that are building on your energy. Take care of your fuel, your food, your sleep, your vitamins, your relationship, your movement. Study what time of day you work your best. I'm an early morning person, so I work most effectively first thing in the morning. Different tasks take different amounts of energy. The things that we love build our energy, and the things that we hate to do drain us. Pay attention to where you're placing those things and how often you are allowing yourself to do or cultivate the things that you love to do that will refuel you and sustain you. Take inventory of what drains you versus what sustains you, and then delegate, eliminate, or automate the things that drain you. Things that you can get off of your plate that actually someone else can do, things that you should no longer be doing, eliminate. And with technology, are there things that you could be automating that you no longer have to do by hand? That's taking up a bunch of your time. The third bucket is your reason to be. And for me, this one in the past 2 weeks has been a huge one. We all get tired. Remember, compassion takes energy and action, and it will require you to take stock of why you are doing what you are doing, putting it somewhere to remember why you're doing it. Post it somewhere that you are able to look at it to remind you. But this is a thing that I want to challenge us. There's breaking news and there's good news. Now, one definition of news is it's a report of recent events or an announcement. We want to know, we need to know. We say, did you hear the news? Are you watching the news? And it's probably on the news. Too much breaking news is breaking us, consuming our thoughts, our emotions, and robbing us of sleep. Dr. Tony Evans has a saying in which he says, emotions must borrow thoughts in order to stimulate feelings. Breaking news is not hard to find. We hear it, we watch it, we can get notifications in our pocket for it. But all news is not equal, and all news should not rule your day. And every bit of news should not be allowed to drive your reason to be. No matter how devastating, shocking, exhausting, or frightening today's stories are, I'm not discounting that the season and the time and the news reports have weight to them. They are not the only news you should be paying attention to. Do we see, do we look for and acknowledge and make room for and encourage ourselves with and make a priority looking for good news at the center of what you do and how you are impacting others? I'm going to be honest with you. The past week, I found myself exhausted, mostly because my physical energy tank was depleted, and emotionally, I did not pay attention to that tank either. And I abandoned my rituals and routines that continue to keep me fueled and energized. I had lost sight of that, and so I found myself in a place of fatigue. In that place of fatigue, I began to doubt the value that I was adding, and I ruminated on it for a moment. And for a week, I found myself in a place of being frustrated. And I kept running that tape over and over again. And it came time for me to speak to a group of people, and I knew they were going to give me pushback on what I had to share. And I went into that conversation ready for the fact that they're not going to want to hear, they're not going to want to listen. And so what difference does this actually make? But I went in because I remembered my who goal. I am here to be a woman of integrity, and I will stand in that integrity in every room I am in, even if it is uncomfortable. So I paid more attention to my assignment. My assignment weighed more and was more valuable than my discomfort. So I went into the room, and sure enough, as I presented, immediately the pushback came. And in that moment, in my mind, the news report of see, it doesn't make any difference, it played. But in that moment, I decided to reach for a chair, put it in the middle of the room, sit in the chair and take a breath and lean into the discomfort, because I knew the assignment that I am on has value. And I stayed in the conversation. You see, in that moment, I had to decide that I wasn't being buried by that moment, but I had been planted in that moment, and it was time for me to grow. So I grasped the moment, I leaned in, we wrestled with content and ideas, and then at the end, we moved the barometer just a bit. We didn't get as far as I wanted to, but we got farther than we had when we first started. I packed my bags and began to leave, and I got a text message on my drive home from one of the participants. She sat front and center, and she did not take her eyes off of me the entire time. And her text message, in summary, shared how I have fueled her life to help her be better, to help her to grow, and to challenge her in new ways. You see, if I had paid more attention to the breaking news and allowed it to break me, I would have missed that moment of connecting with the good news, of realizing there is still value in what you are doing. And I will not compromise the reason for why I'm here. The assignment that I have will not be compromised for the discomfort of others, of a system that's still trying to figure out how to balance out and have harmony and legitimize self-care and well-being. I'm going to continue to lean in and advocate for what's right in equity, in justice, in those who are marginalized, and as well as for myself. So if I can encourage you to pay attention to your relationships, pay attention to how you are regulating not only your time, but paying attention to your energy stock, And then remember your reason to be. And don't allow breaking news to break you. Remember that you shift the atmosphere when you walk into a space, and that there is, on the other side of you continuing to lean in to do what's right, there is good news. This is one of my favorite quotes. Now, every time I witness a strong person, I want to know, what darkness did you conquer in your story? Mountains don't rise without earthquakes. As we prepare for our town hall conversation, I've read some of your questions and they have been amazing, those who have sent them in ahead of time. I want us to respect the fact that each one of us has our own narrative, our own story, and we want to be able to be in a collective community space together. So our community agreements as we go into the next part of our conversation is, as you share your question, to be succinct, to use an I statement, speak from your own truth, not they or them. Lean into the discomfort. Give yourself permission to be curious. And we will not always agree, but we must be willing to listen to one another. So I appreciate the fact, and I apologize as any slides that ended up being blurry. It's weird how technology can work against us, but I hope what I've shared thus far has added value to you. And I give it back to Jamal and Nancy as we unpack some of those questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. We're getting some comments in the chat saying, I don't want to misquote it. This presentation is amazing. I'm a full believer in language shapes your culture, and Dr. Jackson is sharing these lovely phrases that inspire me to think about building my culture differently. So, and that was shared by Casey. So you can be sure that what you are saying is ruminating with people. So,
Yes.
Jamal, can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
I would just like to say to Dr. Jackson that I felt as if you were speaking directly to me. And I would suggest that of the 700 and something people that are listening at this moment, I'm not the only one that had that experience.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that feedback.
So right now what we want to do, everyone, is open up for Q&A with Dr. Jackson. And we would invite you to put any questions that you may have in the Q&A, and please let us know if you would be willing to ask that question live. And we will pop you up on screen with Dr. Jackson so you can answer your question, so she can answer your question, and we can have some interaction. So
I'll add that we are in the middle of a town hall in case anybody forgot. So that means that everybody has a chance to raise their hand, to have something to say. If you want to come up to the mic, we can make that happen for you. We're excited to hear what you all have to say.
True. So with that, Dr. Jackson, Sarah asked in the chat, going back to one of your slides, I think she wanted to just know, when doing an energy audit, what does the number 1 stand for?
So the energy audit, number 1 is, it is even keeled. So you did the task, it was moderate, it didn't really take away from you, it didn't give you life, but it was a sustainable, it was a moderate task, kind of middle of the road. And then after that, you're looking at your -2, your 1, and your +2. and begin to assess how many do you have of each of those and how much time are you allotting for each of those, especially the ones that are going to fill your energy tanks in any of those 4 areas.
Thank you. So Joshua Sachs has agreed to go live with us. And if you could pop Josh up on the screen, Nancy, to answer, so he can ask his question.
Joshua, he should be showing up right about there. He is. Joshua, please ask your question.
Okay. Well, that's a specific question, but it's in the vein of something larger. Well, I've been a social worker for 30 years, working in child welfare, first in Manhattan in New York, and now in the suburb of Philadelphia. And it seems that note-taking has gotten a bigger thing. It's like wagging the dog as far as I'm concerned. And they say, if you don't document it, it never happened. But I find sometimes, especially in a difficult case, that it's one of the greatest sources of vicarious trauma. Like, you've survived an encounter with a mandated hostile client, and then they say, well, if you don't write a note about it, it's as if it never happened. Which just, to me, asking for trouble. Like when I first started in New York, note-taking, they triple, quadruple the amount of time they want you to work on documentation. And I don't think it's helped the clients any. So do you have any recommendations on how to deal with that? Both, I guess, as you're dealing with those, I guess, the policymakers, but more so how to do it, how to deal with yourself, how to get through such an encounter, as it were.
So I want to make sure I'm hearing, because I'm hearing 2 different questions, and I want to make sure that I address it. So one is actually connecting with or being impacted by a family or an experience that was triggering, that impacted you as the professional, those who have been trauma impacted, whatever that experience is, it triggered you, as well as, so how do I document that and create the time for that? And is that actually necessary? Or how can I communicate the documentation to someone else?
Or how
Are they?
I guess
Go ahead.
the truth is, at a practical level, I guess the only real way to do it is to work on myself to be able to do it, because it's clear the trend is not going to change in social work, where they're going to say, all this emphasis on documentation was all wrong. We're going to switch tacks. That's unrealistic, even though it should happen. But so how has a person in the real world dealing with this? How do you deal with having to document things and relive it in order to do so without or minimize your the re-traumatization that you cause yourself when you have to constantly relive? You have to do a note, you have to discuss it with a supervisor, with sometimes in court. I mean, it gets to the point where you're more traumatized than the client sometimes by the end of it.
So Josh, first of all, I want to thank you for your veteran status in a field that is hard, and acknowledging that we first have to be willing to create strategies that help me stay grounded and present, so that somebody else's trauma does not continue to trigger me and continue to create a reenactment on me. So aside from the visit itself, it's creating those consistent routines and strategies. Some may call it a safety plan, where you actually have something written down that when you leave an experience that has triggered you and has left residue on you, that you do something in that time of debrief to detox from it and begin to create a consistent routine within or after, before and after visits for you to take care of yourself so that you're not constantly going back into those moments. You're creating strategies to get present in the now and to get regulated. The other piece is also identifying how you can utilize documentation, not just for the sake of reenacting what you experienced, but also recognizing there's some documentation that can help you process what you experience, as well as change or reframe the perspective that you have about the client, about the situation, as well as yourself. Some documentation can be used to even help you process and get into a better headspace around understanding the dynamics of what's going on. So I have to echo with you, yes, some of it is going to be about our self-work and how can we better navigate and create safety plans for us to not be consistently triggered by experiences that we're having. We can't just keep pushing through. That's not going to work.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah wanted to follow up on her question about energy audit. She said, when doing an energy audit, I wonder what kind of things will go into mental versus emotional energy. I have a hard time with those two. So maybe if you could give us.
So,
go ahead, Doc.
mhm, mhm.
No, I was just.
So mental. So that mental energy tank are actually things, going back to the breaking news versus the good news. It is our mental practice of what do we continue to think on, think about, spend time ruminating on, that is either depleting our tank or filling our tank. How do we mentally create opportunities to connect with things that are going to enhance our knowledge, our awareness, our presence, all of those things are in our ability to manage our mindfulness. Emotions, if you recall Dr. Evans' quote, that our emotions are going to borrow from our thoughts. So if we are working on what we're thinking on, our emotional tank are the things that we then begin to emote. The things, the joy, laughter, spending time, even in some cases of healing, allowing ourselves to cry, to release, in order for us to get more present into our bodies and more accountable for how we're managing our emotions. Anger can be exhausting. And how can we pay attention to where we are either adding, subtracting, dividing, or the things that are multiplying in and through us, even through the emotions that we emote and give out. Was that helpful, Sarah? I can't see the chat.
Yes, she says yes. So Eve wanted to know if you could address if it's okay for one to make a career change and not feel like one is abandoning a passion or looking at it as a failure.
Wow, I love that question because I think it is tied to, again, I know I sound like a broken record, but those keystones to that compassion satisfaction pyramid are their truth, they're vital. Who do you desire to be? And is this change going to continue to support that who goal? If we're running from something, then we need to assess why are we running. But if we're actually making a course correction because I'm still going to be able to walk out who I am going to be. I mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, and when I coach individuals, I pull this apart a lot. We have to be careful that we are not attaching our value, our identity to what we do. They are two separate things. If you are continuing to show up in who you are going to be in this season, and the new opportunity allows you to continue to grow in that who goal, then a course correction is not failure. It's just hitting a new direction. I've done in our growth webinars, I use this analogy of when I remember when we were small that we had these flowers and they were all put into little vases, and one was placed directly under the light and another was placed just outside of the light, kind of almost in the darkness, but just outside of the light. And that flower began to bend and grow in the direction of the light. That's a course correction. It's not that you're not growing. It's not that you have failed. It's not that you are a failure. You're making a course correction, and that's not a failure. You're continuing. If you are doing it, remaining authentic to who you are creating a course correction for you to continue to grow in who you are assigned to be, just in a different platform.
Totally agree. I know back when I was in my classes over at Lakeside with you, and I was really struggling in the position that I was in at the time, working at the residential treatment facility that I was working in, and coming to those classes week in and week out, and having these conversations with my peers and with you and Ms. Robin, and it was hard. I had been there for 17 years, and it was like, I love my job. I love the work. I love working with the kids that I'm working with. And it was so hard. It was something that y'all had said that really stuck with me. And then this position became available. And it was like, this is it. This is where I need to go. This is the next step in my journey. I don't need to be scared anymore, because I was now sure that I needed to move on. Mm-hmm. So yes, I totally believe everything that you just said, because that right there in a nutshell has been what my journey is.
Awesome. Thank you for being so honest and transparent, Jamal.
No problem. Gabriel asks, how can you help an agency to understand that their culture needs to change when all employees are burning out, leaving the agency?
So that's complicated, but it is an ongoing conversation. And the first is recognizing that everything rises and falls with leadership. And if there is a continued instability, if there's continued discord, if that means that there's something within the system, within the organization, that actually needs to be addressed. And it's being able to identify the right person to have the conversation with leadership around the influence we have is tremendous. And if I could share one more slide, because I had a feeling an organizational question would come up. I'm going to share this slide because when I coach leadership teams in in seasons of change. And if there's anything we have been experiencing over the past 2 years, it has been constant change, but it's bringing up concrete. So it's not going into the conversation saying, I feel this way, but it's identifying, do we have 5 anchor things in place to and consistently doing them in order to move to a place of change. And so if it's okay, can I share one more slide? Is that
Please
okay?
do.
Okay.
Please do.
Don't be mad at me. It's just like, is she going rogue? I'm not trying to go rogue, and I do hope. So I hope that you can see it. I know you might not be, but I'm going to be able to explain it. So it's an equation. There are 5 things that lead to change. Vision plus skill plus reason to be plus resources plus plan equals change. If you are missing any of those 5 things and you're trying to pursue change, you are going to get something other than change. For example, if you're missing vision, you're going to end up seeing confusion. So if you go in and you're trying to build people's skill and you're trying to remind people of their reason to be and you're throwing resources at them, and you might even have a plan, but you haven't shared the vision, you're going to see confusion. If you don't have skill, you gave them the vision, you told them, you've reminded them of their reason to be, you continue to provide resources and you have a plan, but you haven't given them the skills to be able to execute it, you're going to see anxiety on the other side of it. If you haven't reminded them of their reason to be, the reason why, what the change is going to create, you're going to receive or see resistance. If you don't share resources, if you hold resources back, but you're going to say, we're going to change all these things, but you don't provide the resources, you gave the vision, you've trained them, you've reminded them of why this is important, and you laid a plan out, but you're not supporting it with resources, you're going to see frustration. And lastly, if you don't have a plan, you can put all those things in place and it can be beautiful. But if you don't have a clear plan in front of them, you're running on a treadmill. You're not going anywhere. So if you want to have a conversation where you're noticing emotions, behaviors, resistance, frustration, approach them with a concrete conversation that we're missing one of these 5 things. And can we go back and revisit them? Because this is what we're seeing within the front line. And as a leadership team, let's go back and identify what we're missing from the equation. Was that helpful at all?
I think so. I think
That was a great
Okay,
slide. We
good.
had a number of people say to us, what a great slide.
Based on the questions that came up ahead of time, I was like, okay, so we're going to have some organizational questions. And I literally use that slide with every leadership team. We do that assessment before we get started so that we can identify why aren't we moving forward? Well, we're missing this. So now let's get strategic around the thing that's missing from the equation.
It makes
Oh, and
sense.
I like this comment. Somebody just asked to have that slide laminated and hang it in their office. Like, me too. I'll take one of those.
And I saw in the chat the question, can we have a copy of the slides? I am going to offer them because I do apologize. I don't know why technology wouldn't allow you to see all of them clearly. So I absolutely want to make sure you have them as a resource. So I will create a PDF of them and send them to Nancy and Jamal. And if they're able to provide it as a link along with the video, hopefully it will
We'll definitely do
add
that.
value
Thank you so
to your
much,
work.
Dr. Jackson, for offering to do that. We do appreciate that.
Absolutely.
All right. So moving on. Elena Do you have any suggestions on how to stick with your boundaries if you fear that there will be consequences at work because you may not be seen as someone who works as hard or cares as much? I hear this so much in education.
Mm. So I want to make sure I understand the question. So is it that what I heard is that you want to establish boundaries, but how do you establish boundaries and up against the perception of others and how they perceive or take in your boundaries? Am I understanding the question correctly?
Elena is still here. Elena Runco, if you could provide some clarity for Dr. Jackson, that would be great. Yes, she says yes. You nailed what
Okay.
you heard.
So, yes. So I think there are two things that come up for me as I think about that question. Establishing clear boundaries need to be tied to clear expectations. So wherever you are, requesting that the expectations be clear first, and then you establish the boundaries in association with the expectation so that you are not compromising the desired outcome, deliverable, or assignment. Because ultimately, we want to be able to move the vision forward or the goal forward. So there has to be clear expectations and then establishing boundaries that connect with the expectations, but still being able to execute the deliverable. Now, sometimes that might show up in that the workload is this huge and I've got this much time. So the expectation we have to sit at the table together and talk about what are the expectations when the workload is this huge and the workday is this big. How are we going to navigate getting the work done? And I still, as a human being, have to establish boundaries and advocate for myself that I cannot consistently work until 7 o'clock every single night and the workday ended at 4. It's having authentic conversations around clear expectations. Now, this is a moment where we lean in together as a collective, a community, talking about this isn't just me saying that I'm working too hard. It's pulling together the collective. Remember that definition. The community is collectively leveraging their power for the desired outcome. So it's understanding that as a collective, ironing out what are the clear expectations, establishing boundaries that will still help us move the mission forward, but not exhaust the team at the same time, and then hold one another accountable for what we said.
So I'm going to bring Elena onto the screen. She has a follow-up based on some of the things
good.
that you were going to be saying. So y'all can have a conversation about it.
Nice.
So that's Elena Griffin.
Runco.
Elena.
She's on right now.
Oh, I guess. Okay, sorry.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Thank you so much. I think I'm also talking about the culture of where people work. And so I like what you said about it has to be almost a collective, we have to come together because an example would be, this is an old job I had, well, you're not seeing enough clients, you're not getting your productivity done because you leave work at 5 o'clock. And Joe over here, he'll stay till 10, so he gets his productivity up. And it's like this culture of comparing people and also almost like a, like you don't care enough if you don't work
Shaming?
enough. Yeah, like if you're working in a school and you don't answer emails late at night and you don't stay after and you don't establish boundaries with students, you're seen as more caring than people who do
Mm-hmm.
set boundaries. And if you don't have everyone doing that, you're kind of this lone wolf out there who doesn't look like they're a productive, caring employee.
Yeah, so two things immediately come up as I think about that very real scenario. Because as I coach, sometimes I coach leadership. The phrase will be, well, I'm here doing this, and they should be. Well, we can't should be other people. This is recognizing what's the expectation realistically for the position. And it will have to be a collective conversation, but also recognizing that your value as an educator, as a human service worker, as someone who is in your field, cannot be defined by somebody else's perception or window that they're looking at you through. So it's recognizing I'm standing in the boundaries that I have, because beyond, I have to be more than this job. I have to be more than this position in order for me to show up fully for the position. And it's beginning to have really hard but honest conversations. But people are always going to try and put their shoulds on you. And we, in some respects, we have to say, no, that's actually just a boundary that I have. And be really clear. Because when we're not clear on why we are doing something, and we're not clear in how our boundary is actually helping us show up more effectively, when someone puts a should on us, we get quaky. But when we're clear, we're able to answer back saying, actually, no, I leave at 5 o'clock because this is how I can show up more fully, more effectively, and more whole for the students, the families, the community that we serve.
I love that. Thank you.
Very welcome.
Thank you. And so Sarah Knoll would like to know. She says she finds it difficult to move from burnout given the systemic issues in healthcare that trickle down and make it difficult to provide quality care. How do you recommend that I and others navigate current large-scale issues?
So I think a part of it is there's some elements to this pandemic that have just absolutely overloaded the system. And things that we have a sphere of influence for, we invest in being a voice for. And where your sphere of influence resides, for yourself, beginning to recognize, and I think I might step on toes in this, and so I'm glad we're almost at the end, because then people will click me off. So it's it is being able to recognize, what am I doing for my own health, well-being, all four of those energy tanks? What am I doing for myself consistently? Because the system, or the overloaded system, just because of where we are, it's how things are. And unless the leader makes a shift, or there's more of something, that the overload is there. Coming back from burnout is my ability to look at what I'm doing consistently. not once in a while when I go out to dinner, or when I go to the gym once a week, or I'm really stressed out on this day, and so I'm going to have a glass of wine with friends this day, and we're going to rant about what happened. It's not the thing that you do in urgency, but it's the thing that you do in consistency that will create self-transformation. So it has to be, what are you creating in your routine? And oftentimes people will come and say, I've tried everything, or I've done all that I can, when actually they've done a few things inconsistently, and they did this thing and then they stopped doing it, and then they did this thing, and they're not seeing the change within themselves. But it's locking in on what can you do within your sphere of influence to sustain you consistently, not occasionally or in urgency.
You. I'm going to ask this question. It might be the last question that we're able to get to. I'm sorry, everyone, we're short on time. But it's from a woman who I was having a conversation with. I asked her if she wanted to ask it live, but she feared that she might get emotional. So she says, from November 2019 until just recently, I was absorbed not just by my work, but caring for 3 family members and the loss of one. So I think I may have tried to conserve energy by only giving time to the really tough stuff, the negative twos, and then spending time with just neutral things, the ones, to decompress. Mindless stuff like binge watching or PC games, but they became bad habits. So recently she's feel like she's starting to seek out those things that she enjoyed before, the plus twos, like having greater mental energy to actually think about other things. Does this make sense? And if so, do you have any advice as she tries to find her way back?
Oh, yes, it is exactly so. Oh, I am so thankful that you asked this question, because I think when, and I didn't create this slide. I should have. I thought about it and I didn't. When we think about the plus two things, sometimes we create such a narrow view of the actual things that we can choose from. I'm going to give you an assignment to Google sensory diet checklist. Sensory diet checklist. And you can look for the PDF version. When we think about our 5 senses, when you're going to start going back to plus 2 things that bring you joy, that refuel you, it's identifying within the 5 senses, because remember, whether it is secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, or even burnout, overwhelm, it resides in our bodies, in our nervous system. So how do we address it? By going after the nervous system and using our 5 senses. What I love about the sensory diet checklist is it has an opportunity for you to look at all 5 senses and begin to check off a multitude of ideas that tap into your senses. So it's not just going to the nail salon when you're actually someone who aroma brings you to life. If aroma brings you to life, then begin to pick things that are tied to aroma. Or you're looking at and binge watching TV, which by itself is actually not a self-care strategy, just putting it out there. You're picking something that's visual, and you're actually a movement person. and you're not paying attention to the things that are tied to movement that actually are your plus two. The sensory diet checklist is awesome because you can check off multiple things and then look back at it and look and see what areas of the five senses are most checked, and therefore begin to pick things that are like those things that are going to be your plus two, instead of just kind of always going to the things that are on the front of our thoughts. But begin to dig a little bit deeper and get creative, tied to your sensory sensations in your body to release the tension that is bound in your stress.
Thank you for that answer, Dr. V. If we could get one more question, we have Amy Birch and she wants to go live. So Nancy, you could.
She should be coming any second. There she is.
Hi, can we hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So with the sensory diet that you just mentioned, that gave me some thought. That was good. Thank you for that. In addition, so I am a school teacher. Today, I found myself to the point of tears, and I cried in front of my students because I told them I'm tired. I'm tired of saying the same thing. I'm tired of it. Guys, I am tired. And, you know, I had tears rolling down my face, and I cried in class, and, you know, then from there class stopped, and I went to my desk and I said, guys, just, you know what? Just stay at your seats until that bell rings, because right now I can't. So when we are caught up in that storm of just exhaustion, that fatigue, that constant secondary trauma that we experience in the moment, what can we do to make it a little bit better?
First of all, I want to say thank you. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for staying in. Thank you for leaning in. Thank you for your commitment. I just want to say thank you. You are seen and you are valued.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And with that, going back to something I shared, I actually, with classroom teachers, I pair the sensory diet checklist with a personal safety plan and a classroom safety plan. You, ahead of time, before the stress, before the overwhelm, you identify for yourself. And the key thing about a safety plan for yourself, as well as the entire class, is that it's visual. So it is somewhere on your desk, on your monitor, somewhere where you can, when you're feeling in that moment, you have picked 3 to 5 things that you have written down that you can actually do in the classroom. So you can have safety plans for different locations. So you might use the sensory diet checklist for home, but you have a safety plan that is sensory based for the classroom. You write it down, and those 5 things are somewhere posted. So when you feel it, and I want to lean in, because I was a classroom teacher too, not in a pandemic. So roof is raised to you. You felt the overwhelm somewhere in your body before the tears came. True?
Yes.
Yes. So you tap into the safety plan when you feel the sensation, not the emotion. It's going to come into your body somewhere. And that's why self-awareness is so important. You're going to feel it in your body first. So when you feel it in your body, you look to the safety plan and you pick something from it to do. The other piece is the power when you create a classroom safety plan is that you have now created a platform of agreement with the students and yourself that in moments that we need to reset, we have lost focus, things are going awry, we agree that when I ring this chime, we're going to all do something from our classroom safety plan as a reset moment. But we have to do all of this before we're overwhelmed, and not just when we're overwhelmed. So every morning, before we start math, we're going to do one thing from our safety plan to focus in our minds, to regulate our bodies, to get grounded. We're going to do it. So we build it in. Remember, it is not the thing that you do in urgency, but the thing that you do in consistency that creates transformation. So it's doing those routines consistently so that they then have muscle memory for when you actually need it in the urgent moments. Helpful?
So very, very helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And with that, I want to thank you, Dr. V. It is 3:58. I want to give Nancy a chance to share any last thoughts.
We had talked about doing different things this year, about starting off this year just a little bit different to keep us all engaged. And the idea that maybe we could have people step in and we could see their faces when they had their questions and have them participate was something we were told we shouldn't do. And I just love to do things when you're told it can't be done. And I think it worked out beautifully today. And I know that's because of our wonderful Dr. Jackson. And I look forward to using that in future speakers in our series. And I thank Dr. Jackson for the help with establishing that, for helping every one of us, I'm sure, on this town hall today, to being generous, to providing us with your time in studio, your time in general, sharing your slides. That's so rare. We are blessed to have you, and I thank you.
Absolutely my pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure. And I just hope that this conversation has added value to your story, to your lives, and that you are encouraged, that you feel and have felt seen, and that your voice has been heard, and to recognize you are not alone. You are not alone. And any story, narrative that you have told yourself that no one else could understand, it is not true. You are not alone. So find community. Find community.
Thank you.
With that, thank you, Dr. Jackson. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you all who decided to ask your questions live. Our next presentation is by Melissa Groden, titled Jules, Puff Bars, and Juice, Oh My. It's about teens and vaping. It's on March 3rd, 2022 at 2:30 p.m., ending at 4, and we look forward to having you all join us then. And until then, everyone stay safe. We'll see you then. All right. Bye-bye.
Wait, Jamal, give us a minute because I just posted a whole bunch of stuff in the chat and I want people to be able to get at the links if they need them. So can we give everybody a minute, please?
Not a problem.
Thank you. And also, I also put a little note over there in the chat that if you wanted to join us tonight, some of us will be listening and watching Dr. Vicarious Jackson in On the Flip Side, Voice America Radio. I put the link in there.
Yes, yes. Every Thursday. I love you, Nancy. Always supportive. Always supportive. Everybody should have a Nancy in their life.
They should. They truly should.
That's a shame Mark didn't hear that.
Go watch the recording, I'm sure.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you all again. Thank you all for coming. And I'm so excited and looking forward to seeing you all again. Be well.
Be well.